Today, we're going to explore a story of ruin, yes, but also of a quiet, difficult rebuilding. It's a story that closes one massive chapter of history and leaves the entire world just waiting for what comes next. So let's turn together to the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. You know, history shows us something pretty sobering about the way God deals with his people. The central lesson from this time, it's a difficult one. Judgment, when it finally comes, well, it rarely arrives like a sudden lightning strike. No, instead, it's a slow, gradual process. A series of warnings, you could say, with each one getting more and more severe. So, to really understand the rebuilding, our story has to start somewhere else. It has to begin not with the hope of restoration, but with the anatomy of how everything was lost in the first place. It all begins with the exile. And you can see how it all unfolded, step by step. First, God allowed a sort of discomfort. Think raiders at the borders, constant low-level threats. Then came loss, drought, famine. After that, scarcity and weakness from disease. It was only after all these warnings went unheeded that the final stage arrived. Exile. And this right here, this is the crucial point. At last, the ultimate judgment came. But it wasn't death, it wasn't annihilation, it was removal. To be taken out of the land, the very land that God himself had promised them. I mean, can you imagine? This was just a profound, devastating unraveling of their entire identity as a people. This fall happened in two major phases. First, way back in 721 BC, the northern kingdom, Israel, was conquered and scattered by Assyria. Then, you fast forward more than a century to 586 BC, and that's when the southern kingdom, Judah, with its capital in Jerusalem, finally fell to the Babylonian Empire. The city was burned. The temple of God was destroyed. Now, what's so striking here is just how methodical this whole process was. Babylon didn't just empty the land all at once. Oh no, they did it strategically, in three distinct waves. First, they took the best and the brightest, the royal court. A young man named Daniel was in that group. Then they came back for the strength of the nation, all the skilled craftsmen. A priest named Ezekiel was among them. And it was only at the very end that they took the rest, leaving the city just desolate. And this exile, it lasted for a very specific amount of time, 70 years. And that number, it wasn't an accident. It was by design. See, the scriptures had taught that the land itself was owed its Sabbaths, its periods of rest that had been ignored. And so, for 70 years, God gave the land its promised rest. But judgment is never God's final word. After those 70 years were complete, a new story begins to unfold. And it's not a triumphant march, not at all. It's a quiet, fragile restoration, the slow, difficult return home. And here we see this beautiful, almost poetic symmetry in the narrative. Think about it. Just as there were three distinct waves of people taken out of the land into exile, there would now be three distinct waves of people coming back to Jerusalem to rebuild, a mirror image. But we have to be really clear about something. This was not a repeat of the first great exodus from Egypt. You could call it a second exodus, an Exodus 2, if you will. And it was so different. It was quiet, it was fragile, and it was incomplete. Here's the startling truth. Most of the Jewish people chose not to return. They built lives in Babylon, you see? They had homes, businesses. To leave all that comfort for a city of ruins, well, that required an immense and very costly kind of faith. So a small remnant does return. And their very first actions, well, they reveal everything about their priorities. This next part of the story is all about worship first and then walls. Just think about this for a moment. They arrive in a city that's nothing but rubble. They're vulnerable, completely exposed. And what's the very first thing they build? Under the leadership of a man named Zerubbabel, it's not a wall for defense, it's not houses for shelter, it is an altar. Before security, before comfort, they established worship. Their relationship with God simply had to come first. Okay, so years later, the second phase of this physical rebuilding begins, the walls. And this massive undertaking is led by a man named Nehemiah, a man of just incredible focus. When his enemies tried to distract him with threats and mockery, he gave this famous reply, "I am doing a great work. I cannot come down." He simply would not be drawn away from the task God had given him. And the result of that kind of focus, it's just astonishing. With the people united, each family working on the section of the wall right outside their own home, they did the impossible. The entire wall surrounding Jerusalem was rebuilt in just 52 days. 52. But here's the thing, an altar and a wall, they're just structures. They're stone and wood. They don't change the human heart. And that brings us to what is arguably the most crucial part of this entire story, the rebuilding of the people's inner life. And this work was championed by a priest named Ezra. And here, we find that sobering, tragic truth, a pattern we see again and again. The people had returned to the land, yes, but they had not fully returned to the Lord. Their hearts were still somewhere else. The same old sins, the same compromises, they began to creep right back in. Because rebuilding the city did not automatically rebuild the people. Ezra's response to this spiritual decay was, well, it was profound. He was a man of the word, through and through, and his method is so important for us to see. Look at the order here. First, he studied the law. He devoted himself to it. Second, he lived the law. He put it into practice in his own life. And it was only then, from that place of deep personal integrity, that he began to teach the law to the people. And when Ezra finally stands up and reads the law aloud to all the people, a powerful thing happens. They begin to weep as the words sink in and they realize just how far they had strayed. But Nehemiah steps in and stops them. He says, "This is a holy day. The joy of the Lord is your strength." He tells them this isn't a day for despair, but for finding strength in the joy of the Lord. So, the city is rebuilt. The word has been restored to the center of their lives. It seems like it should be the triumphant end, right? And yet, the story doesn't end there. It ends in a long, quiet period of waiting. 400 years. After the last prophets of this era, God falls silent. For 400 years, just try to imagine that. No prophet, no miracle, no new word from God. Just a long, quiet stillness from heaven as the people held on to the scriptures they had. But this silence, it wasn't an absence of a plan. Not at all. Because the prophet Daniel, writing from exile long before any of this rebuilding even happened, had been given a timetable. He prophesied that from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, there would be a period of 490 years until the coming of the Messiah. So you see, the clock was ticking, even in the silence. And so that's how the Old Testament closes. It doesn't end with a happily ever after, not even close. The last word of the story isn't triumph, it's expectation. You have a rebuilt city, yes, a renewed covenant, sure, but you also have a fragile obedience and a world that is left in this deep, deep expectation, just waiting for a promise to finally be fulfilled. And all of that, it leads us to the final lingering question, doesn't it? After 400 years of silence, after centuries of waiting, of holding on to old promises while heaven was quiet, what breaks it? What kind of voice could possibly be powerful enough to break that silence?